Hey, last second should have been swallowed. It's me, your host, C, and I'll break the facade and be honest. I hate starting a video in such a depressing light, but for the past couple months since my last upload, I've been in a sort of rut. I really wouldn't call it burnout because I've really wanted to work on all the videos I've been making, but I also wouldn't really call it a lack in creativity or laziness because I've had these ideas for a while now and really wanted to do something with them, to the point I find myself getting more and more painfully lethargic to the thought of how much time I've wasted on these passion projects that I genuinely wanted to work on by doing nothing because I can't even muster enough energy to get out of bed without my legs writhing in a weird sort of slumbering pain. To be honest, my depression, of course, has been hitting really hard recently, if you couldn't tell. So, recently I guess I've just been streaming or doing tiny little edits for me and my friends' Twitch channel, but even now I've sort of gotten to this point where I can't even stay committed to the littlest of edits. During this time, I guess I've been playing a lot of indie horror games though from itch.io, and just as a note, if you really want a good free indie horror game because you don't have the money, just go check them out because they have pages upon pages of mini horror games that allow you to choose your own price, which yeah, means you could essentially get horror games for free. And yeah, when it comes to free horror games, it can be really hit or miss. I even almost bricked my friend Jay's computer with a game having Onision chasing you down his banana suit through a vent. But, while there are a lot of misses like that, there can be a lot of great bangers. Back to the point, I want to talk, if you couldn't tell, about horror today. Primarily horror games and horror game creators that I think do an amazing job in making new stuff that does sort of encapsulate older horror games, except in a more modern day sense. Because even though I hate having to be the primary person in my friend group who plays horror games, I've also always taken a weird comfort in the horror genre, with my first time even seeing a horror movie being when I was 3 with my mom and we were sitting in the living room watching the first couple Resident Evil movies that are arguably not really scary, but still set off my long and cozy relationship with horror that just had me committed to it after I started playing Silent Hill at the age of 5. And whenever I've gone into these slumps, it's always been comforting for me to just sit down on a foggy day with a bunch of blankets, getting lost in a world that reminded me weirdly of what I was going through. So I guess sit down, folks. And whether it's a warm or cold day outside, swaddle up yourself in some blankets and get some coffee or tea because you Brits are imaginary, but I'm still going to, acknowledge you, because tonight we'll be wolfing down the comfort in horror.
James, honey, did something happen to you? After we got separated in that long hallway? Are you confusing me with someone else?
If we're going to start anywhere, let's start at the root. Silent Hill 2 is a game I briefly remember playing when I was 5 and being scared shitless of it, and then being completely encapsulated by the aesthetic of when I was watching the movie at around the age of 8. I didn't know what it was about it, but something about the loneliness of a fog-ridden ghost town that was left to its own self-destruction by the actions of its own people and the town's environment itself just resonated with me, even at such a young age.
Hi, welcome to Silent Hill.
I've actually been wanting to make a video on Silent Hill, but for right now this will have to do. As I got older though, and I could find the words to things more, and I started to realize the reason why I loved this game series. In the first 2 installments, you are completely alone in a foggy town off the lake, with other human interactions being very few and far between, with those gaps being filled with things that preyed upon your insecurities and flaws, the things that made you, or even the people who were closest to you, scared and misanthropic of the world around them. It's something about the loneliness of being an only child my whole entire life and having to face that loneliness day in and day out until it became my friend, dealing with the gnawing depression since the age of 6 and not being able to simply act like or talk to kids my age because of it, and in the end, having to cope with the fact that I felt like somewhat of my own monster the whole entire time, to the point I took comfort in knowing these things about myself, even if I didn't always have the vocabulary to express it. It made me take comfort in foggy days that when you went outside, the streets were absolutely void of life. It made me embrace the weird homish feeling of being absolutely alone with no one around and being able to spend my time exploring or just stay inside drinking hot cocoa while I read a book or I played a video game. But this isn't me saying that becoming used to your flaws and embracing them and not doing anything about it is an entirely good thing. I did have a lot of detriments due to this mindset, and I still do. I am still very self-destructive at times, but Silent Hill's aesthetic and use of its themes made me really embrace that first step to getting better, even if I didn't notice it or not. And being the root of all successful horror games in my mind, there's a no-brainer to it that you are going to find games even today that are going to borrow from what Team Silent did and the way they portrayed things because of how successful it was. Before I start this segment, let me make it clear that yes, I was one of the many cringy kids who made a video I never uploaded to YouTube talking about how I didn't care if Slender Man was real and he saw this. I'm ready and I'll kick his ass. But Slender is also a very weird staple in horror for me as well, which is wild, because what is truly scary about a faceless possible pedophile who lives in abandoned mental hospitals in the woods and suffers from gigantism? And the answer to that is pretty simple. It's not. Slender the creature is not scary by itself. It's much like Silent Hill in the fact that Slender makes himself scary due to the atmosphere he builds up around you and how it slowly erodes at your sense of security. Mr. Saladfinger's Diddler Man makes sure that you are alone. The game places you in an abandoned area at night or during a day with some really shite weather, and then has you constantly feeling as if something is watching you out of sight that is slowly getting closer and closer to you, like it's playing with you, like a child does its food. It uses psychological aspects, except in a different way from Silent Hill. While Silent Hill focuses on the many different facets of psychology, guilt, trauma, Freud the Fraud, Slender focuses on the stalker, predator, and prey dynamic. You are not safe wherever you go, and as it's stated in the multiple online ARGs that surround his mythos, even if you get away from Slender, you've never and will never truly escape him. You are simply an ant who's been pulled into a trap door spider's home, and even if you've made leeway, you haven't come close to the door and may not make it out. It envelops you with a sense of patronizing horror. Will you escape this faceless being who seems to always be a step ahead of you, or will you crumble like a pawn that you are in the grand scheme of things? If this dynamic doesn't inspire some sort of feeling in you, then you probably won't be scared of this game, especially if you're not into BDSM. If you don't suffer from anxiety or the creeping sense of fear that comes from self-sabotage or the doom to your own hands or the hands of another, then this game probably won't affect you. Because when I play Slender, it doesn't entirely scare me, I'll admit it, but I enjoy it. I enjoy the feeling of trying to escape an impending doom, even if it's pointless to, and the adrenaline that comes from it. And I know, that's looking way too deep into a meme to even cringy levels, but to me, it's the reason I kept coming back to it, even if Amnesia was factually the superior horror game. I'd argue the huge 80s and 90s PlayStation 1 horror theme has really been booming because of Puppet Combo. And while I'm usually the type of person who says things like fuck nostalgia and
I was born in the wrong generation,
I genuinely do find stuff coming out of this to actually scare me more than the supposed 21st century Silent Hills that try and tackle a subject on mental health that end up failing terribly, while other people claim they're the scariest thing they've ever played. But yet again, that's not hard to really do when you throw in tank controls and panic somebody with the screaming of a woman who may or may not actually be getting murdered. But the first time I ever saw someone play a game of Puppet Combos was Babysitter Bloodbath, and that was back in 2014 when I was in 8th grade, an awkward mess who just wanted to get his license in his freshman year. But back to it, they are mainly known for games like Stay Out of the House, Power Drill Massacre, Nun Massacre, are you seeing a theme here? Night Ripper, The Glass Staircase, and I think there was one about a weird feeder relationship with a toothy butthole mouth demon, where the demon was the feedy. Yeah, as a quote tweet from Puppet Combo themselves as a non-response to an article.
Not related to the article but one thing I wanted to expand on was actual survival horror game. Most of the games I've made have been in the slasher genre and exploring what a slasher game could be. I've used survival horror elements while doing this.
Don't ask me why I gave them an Italian simulated accent. I really don't know. I thought it would be funny. Was it funny? I don't know. And this can be seen with how their games feel more like a schlocky horror movie from the 70s and 80s like Friday the 13th or Halloween in their settings and plot. But then you have to contrast that with the fact that it's a survival horror game that takes mechanics from older horror games of its kind with a good use of anticipation, environment, and angles. And honestly, that's such a good way to make someone feel like they're in a slasher film in a way that has never been as accurately done before. I actually think the use of tank controls as well is perfect here for that reason, because personally, I really hate tank controls, but that's because they do their job perfectly. They make moving harder, so if you want to easily escape or quickly aim and shoot your issues away, you either can't or it feels really clunky. Now combine that with the fact you're already in a heavy atmosphere intense game that takes a lot of inspiration in its scares from chase scenes in older horror movies with its screeching mind-breaking music that was made for a jump scare that never overstayed its welcome no matter how long it was there. Then that is truly how to make someone feel like they're in an actual simulated slasher movie situation, while also keeping the intensity of it. It's the eeriness to it all in the end as well, really, if I have to add on anything. The visuals are already hard and grainy. The movement is going to take some time to get used to if you're not used to tank controls. And the environments are amazing and will throw you for a loop. And some of the games, especially when you add in the ooga booga thought process you'll have when trying to run away out of survival so you don't end up having to start over from stage 1 again. Puppet Combo's games remind me that horror games can still be absolutely terrifying, while fleshing out and really establishing this slasher genre of horror games that Clock Tower and others have attempted on doing but felt off on. And without them, we also wouldn't really see some of the games that try and capture the Silent Hill aesthetic and feel with varying degrees of success. Even though their games are nowhere near similar to the nostalgia-ridden games of RE and Silent Hill, except for their survival theme and element as well. And with that being said, I'm really sorry that I feel like I can't even say more and I have to leave it off on what feels like an insult to me by just comparing it to Resident Evil and Silent Hill in the base survival horror game terms. I'd love to go on more, but it's something I feel like I need to have a conversation with the actual creator about in order to have a fleshed out understanding of that. If you're up for it, Puppet Combo, I'd love to just have a vent sesh with you off camera, where you tell me your motives, goals, feelings, and inspirations behind making these games. Because I'd love to know what's truly going on behind the brain that made me even more scared of the religious women who literally shoved me into a closet when I was 5. And if you get this far in my butchered explanation of why I love your games, I'd also like to add that I feel like I've been losing hope in video game creators recently, that seeing you chugging through with a decent community of avid horror lovers of every kind with products that actually warrant the support really does give me hope in a genre I feel like some bigger named companies somewhat try and suffocate and make stale these days. So with that, thank you, Puppet Combo, and keep up your great innovative work.
In the psychology of the modern civilized human being, it is difficult to overstate the significance of the house. Since as early as the Neolithic era, humankind has defined itself by its buildings. Buildings for worship, buildings for socializing, buildings for protection, even buildings for the commemoration of the dead. But of all the structures that mankind has invented for itself, there is little doubt that the house is that which it relies upon most completely for its continued survival.
KittyHorrorShow is definitely someone who has my interest piqued when it comes to the way she makes her horror games. Much like animes like Serial Experiments Lain or even the ending of Neon Genesis or other abstract works, I don't think many people who are used to AAA horror games are going to really understand her projects at first appearance. But when you actually play them and take that time to get immersed and understand the environments she's built, you start to realize the creeping unsettledness of it all. From the sometimes dyslexic, unfriendly, "Can you slow the fuck down?" From the text to the way the games slowly derail themselves, or how they get you to feel like they will, but don't entirely. I wouldn't say Kitty's games purely scare me in each one, but they do unnerve me with each experience I have in them. And for some reason, that's the part that has me the most comforted by them. It's not like all of her games do this, but knowing that I'll be able to just sit down and download a pack of short horror experiences that'll leave me theorizing the connectivity of them due to their use of living, breathing houses and land that'll eat you alive if it hates you enough or you waste your time, congealed blood, people being tied down by veins that have screaming mouths on them with British teeth, and the general use of blood and viscera as if it's like an everyday fossil fuel. An example of one game most people watching this might have actually heard of or seen if they were following the right people is Anatomy. Anatomy is a nice experience having you loop inside of a seemingly empty house collecting tapes from each room that you play in the kitchen. The tapes sound like a college professor of either literature or biology making comparisons on how parts of the house can be used and compared to parts of the body. This slowly starts to derail after you go through your first playthrough of it though, as when you start your second go-around of the game, another voice comes into play. There's even a recollection about a man covered in oversized ticks who barges into the home vandalizing it. The speaker has no arms, but still somehow slams the door on the man, pushing him down to the basement where he is mashed, torn, dissolved, much like a human does its food with its stomach. During your third playthrough, it is all turned upside down. The walls are red, the previous glitches are now just everywhere, much like a living organism, and as you enter the basement for the last time, it is revealed that you are to be eaten by the mouth of this lonely house that has been abandoned and mistreated throughout all of its years. KittyHorrorShow's games give off a weird sort of pain to each one of them, a writhing sense of loneliness, not belonging, desperate attempts in escaping a town that never cared for you, or the everyday leeches in your life that will suck your emotions dry that might even be you yourself. For me, KittyHorrorShow weirdly makes her games feel like an abstract suicide note to an uncaring world that sort of understood what it was doing, but didn't care enough because it didn't know what else to do but perpetuate that parasitic relationship in order to survive itself. And that's not me trying to do a psychological evaluation of the creator. That's just the best way I can sum up how I personally feel after each game I play, and I actually love that. I feel like they capture a sort of unnerving nature that some Silent Hill games used to do, but focuses on that main nature and prolongs it into a intensely enjoyable, playable experience, placing you in sometimes grandiose, empty environments to in some way make you feel alone or constantly on edge, peeking over your shoulder just to see nothing. Or how it puts you in a weirdly simple area that will quite literally organically expand into a complex living mess that no longer cares and has become misanthropic and full of dread. Each game she makes is a beautiful art project, displaying a horror story, dealing with weirdly, overtly organic, but just as human concepts and themes that I just can't get enough of. So, in all honesty, KittyHorrorShow, if you ever come across this, you make great work, and you're honestly one of the horror creators who I've been having the most fun with playing their games in a while. So for her and Puppet Combo, I'll leave their Patreon links in the description, and please, go give them a subscription if you have the money and want a good, consistent value indie horror game experience. They won't disappoint. Now, I know I'm very critical of the, oh, I'm going crazy theme in horror games recently, especially since it seems like companies, Liberty, tend to just scapegoat the issues in some kind of way on the playable character's specific mental illness, making me feel more demonized for having cases of post-traumatic stress and mental health issues in general, which shouldn't be new due to the film industry, but hey, I'm still gonna complain about it. But Cry of Fear was one of the first games to really do this and be blunt with it, but also use it in a way that isn't completely offensive to my eyes, ears, and stomach. This horrific game, made on the Half-Life engine, starts off with a specific edgy letter.
I've always felt alone. My whole life. For as long as I can remember. I don't know if I like it or if I'm just used to it. But I do know this. Being lonely does things to you. And feeling shit and bitter and angry all the time just eats away at you.
And from this, we can tell that the character we are going to be playing has already been in a very lonesome and dark place right off the bat, and has even been there for what feels like forever. That's something I really like about this game that I think all games trying to do something like this should do. If you are going to make a psychological horror experience where you want the character to be a partial reason and why everything is falling apart around them, don't specify and use stereotypical out-of-book definitions to tell us that and force it down our throats. Use abstract means, imply simple things that no one would truly think about or dig too deep into on first view, because it is obvious that Simon is mentally ill and deals with things like depression, anxiety, and maybe even possibly some disorders dealing with the illusions and delusions of the mind. But the creators never go and blatantly tell you what they really are, because they know that by the way they've set up this game and its story that people will be able to infer this already about the character to the point there won't need to be this entirely big set up insert definition of dissociative identity disorder here moment. It plays off of a sort of Silent Hill vibe where everything around you is falling apart and going completely bat guano, but instead it's being vaguely blatant about how you, Simon, are a part of the real reason for this whole entire thing happening to you. From the moments where you are off the bus and you get hit by a car trying to help someone, to going through states of consciousness where sometimes you see a padded cell with blood on the walls. Hey, I never said we were entirely subtle here. To even the tutorial not making a whole lot of sense and you waking up in a completely new area, unless that's just a regular night in Sweden. But with all of that said, it also derives something from Silent Hill in making you feel paranoid about any human interaction you'll have, something I already talked about in this video. But even then, they make it feel so weird that you aren't entirely the victim in these situations. For example, whenever you get past a huge big cutscene and boss fight, you are usually treated to a little snippet of memory coming back to you. So while you might have been seen more so as a victim or stander by in the game, you realize that Simon might not have even been as innocent as we had believed him to be. But that's not saying Simon is inherently evil. That's what I like a lot about this game as well. Simon is not some shrewd artist who had bipolar, who traumatized his family until their mansion finally became a big haunted house attraction marketed as a purgatory. He's not some returning war vet who deals with PTSD to the point he went off the rails and killed people in the name of a Blair Witch game. And Simon totally wasn't a waste of $50 on a girl who forgets her foster father in the first couple seconds, only to realize her biological father and her both got dissociative identity disorder due to near-death traumatic experiences that allowed them to traverse the land of the dead with alternate personalities. And make a big fuss about Akira Yamaoka for literally nothing but 2 songs right at the end, but you know what, that's fun. Simon is just a run-of-the-mill guy who's always been down on his luck and alone, leaving a huge fertile ground for mental illness to emerge, who tried to actually help someone and do something good, only for it to strip him even more, and by this time, couldn't see the point in the therapy he was getting. And while all these endings are some kind of bittersweet, I guess he does always get what he fucking deserves. He isn't special, just another jaded person by a world around them that got shat on the one time they tried to outreach a hand instead of just walking past. There's no textbook definition needed for Simon. There's no need to lump all of his issues under one word's stereotypes and have that be the pivotal detriment to the game and its main character. Because the team behind this knew that people dealing with mental illness are not just suffering from one thing and the stereotypes that come out of it. There are events in our lives and pre-existing conditions in our heads that can feed into each other and send us down a slippery slope of 3 o'clock a.m. regrets. I actually understand a lot of Simon's character. When it comes to his loneliness and paranoia, of course, I still have my 2 legs, I guess, but I guess the other huge difference is while Simon got stuck in antagonizing and being purely spiteful towards a world that forced him to be alone, I eventually came to peace with that, tried to embrace it in order to move on, rejecting the pure, never-ending spite it wanted me to have for it. And that's why it's such a staple on me. Because had I not had the right experiences and met the right people, people like me probably would have ended up in a similar situation Simon finds himself in. And I'm not saying that for all of us, but I'm saying, for me at least, it was a huge possibility. Okay, it's been a while since I started this video. And I came back to this part specifically in my audio because I remembered how raw its original was. And while it isn't bad, it's anywhere from it. It is hard for me to somewhat listen back to and edit around with knowing the context of what I was going through. So I'll be honest here. The reason I started this video was because a couple months back, I got hit by something I hadn't dealt with since I was 13 and 15, and it was something that was so bad, it cripplingly made me afraid to even leave my house when other people were around. You know, and here I was in this sort of place again, finding myself succumb to this crippling fear that I had found myself in, even though I know it isn't my fault entirely as well. So I guess I remembered the one thing that made me feel better through all these moments I had in my past. And that was horror, in a way. And in a way, that sort of makes horror a sort of home for me, weirdly. To be honest, I've never seen someone talk about how the horror genre helped some people process their own thoughts and emotions in their lowest times, just as it has done for me. So I wanted to make this video for those people who love the psychological and symbolic side to horror, who use it to cope and deal with unresolved trauma and other mental illnesses like I did when I was growing up and as I still do now. To be honest, everyone in Silent Hill was running away from the demons of their own subconscious, scared and confused about what their future holds for them and if they can even truly trust themselves to be innocent, which is something most of us will end up having to go through at some point in our lives. There was never any real escaping Slenderman in his ARGs, mythoses, and games, and even if your character escaped, you know you'd meet him again, just as people who suffer from depression and anxiety like myself will certainly have to face it again, even if they're in a good spot just for right now. Cry of Fear was the first game I played that made me realize what path I could have possibly gone down in my life, in a way that felt like it went in depth and was blatant enough without having to be specific on the blame or reason for Simon's condition, without vilifying him to an irredeemable point in the eyes of the player, but still holding him accountable of his own atrocious actions. Puppet combo games give me comfort for when I want to have fun and just kick back hearing my friends scream, but it also soothes me knowing not everyone making horror games these days are just chasing after what previous games did just for shallow success. Some people do it because they genuinely love the aesthetics and want to come make something fun and scary for everyone else. And KittyHorrorShow's games remind me of the feelings I have sometimes, especially right now, where I think about what my last goodbyes would be to an uncaring universe. But at the same time, reminding me of those same thought processes that kept me going even though in some ways it wanted to tear me down, in order to better accept and process what I was going through. As I said before, and I'll say again, horror is a home-ish sort of thing for me, and it's helped me see how beautiful the pain we go through can be. And going against what I originally wrote here, I guess, in this script, that is sappy, revealing, and cringy. But you know what, that's okay. Because it's okay to find home in a genre if it helps you come to accept what you're going through and realize you're not alone entirely in it. So you know what, thank you for coming to this cringy and cynical furries video, and thanks for stopping by.